May I now request Paranjoy, who is also the moderator of the discussion, to take the proceedings forward. Thank you again.
Thank you, Manish. Without your help, this wouldn't have happened. Start by an apology for couldn't get the coffee and tea ready in time. The books too got the car in which it was coming got caught in a terrible traffic jam. Worst fears that terrible dust storm would start just now have been thankfully belied. So we're always grateful for what we have. And I'm especially grateful to our panelists who are here. I mean, especially we have Mr. Fali S Nariman, 86 years young, one of India's most distinguished, perhaps the most distinguished constitutional jurist and senior advocate, the Supreme Court of India. He's been a senior advocate in the highest court of India since 1971. At least there are a few people here who were born after that, I know. Mr. Nariman is recognized not only in this country but across the world as an authority, particularly on arbitration and international arbitration. And he's not just one of India's most distinguished constitutional lawyers, and he's argued several leading cases. He was the additional Solicitor General of India between May 1972 and June 1975. And he's also been served as nominated as a member of the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of parliament, for a 6-year term between 1999 and 2005. And he's won a number of awards, including the Padma Bhushan in 1991, the Padma Vibhushan in 2007, and the Gruber Prize for Justice 2002. These are just a few of his many, many achievements and number of reasons why he's as distinguished as he is. And so we are extremely happy and grateful that he agreed readily, even without having read what had been written, to come here and speak. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give a big hand to Mr. Nariman.
Guha is a good chap, but he goes on and on. Which reminds me of what J.R.D. Tata once told me when he came to consult me on some matter where he had been hauled up for contempt of Parliament years ago. And he told me this story that in Bombay, 3 of them were being introduced, and the chairman of the meeting had the biodata of 2 of them, but not of J.R.D. So he introduced them, he spoke about the first chap, the second chap, and then he looked for the data, but he couldn't find anything. So he said, and as for Mr. J.R.D. Tata, the less said about him, the better. So I think you should start like that. So this is an excellent book, and I'm told that if you buy 6 copies, you also get a shirt free. It's Sue the Messenger. Sue the Messenger. I hope, there you are. There you are. I was reminded when I read it that what one time great economist and a great humorist also, John Galbraith, said when he was alive, there is always pleasure in the fall of the great and the greatly fraudulent. And the pursuit by journalists of repute of the greatly fraudulent is what makes for journalists with courage. With major corporate explosions all around the world, including India, people are saying that if corporate governance had been attuned, it would have been at the top of the pops. Corporate governance or the lack of it has spawned many stories, and I am happy to see they are included in this very racy book. In the chapter headed Money Over Matter, I particularly liked these 2 sentences. Journalists follow the money trail, always come up with good stories. Yes, they do. Of course, not everyone likes such stories, especially those inconvenienced by what is described as scrupulous data mining. And they file suits, and hence the title Sue the Messenger. I like the acronym SLAP, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. Very clever. But I'm sorry to disappoint. I'm afraid there is no way to prevent such suits being filed. And I'm sure that does not deter journalists with motivation and courage. Because I must tell you that under Indian law, every person has a right to file a suit against you or me of a civil nature, except where its cognizance is barred. And the Supreme Court in a celebrated judgment said that there is an inherent right in every person to bring a suit of a civil nature unless barred by statute. One may at one's peril bring a suit of one's choice. At one's peril. A suit for its maintainability requires no authority of law, and it is enough that no statute bars the suit. However nasty the corporate, his right to file a suit is almost akin to a fundamental right. So you will have to live with it. I am afraid suing the messenger is something you simply cannot get rid of. But the more important thing, in my view, is jailing the messenger. In other words, the devil is in the criminal law of defamation. There is little justification for criminalizing what essentially was and still is a civil wrong, namely injury to reputation, such as it is, which cannot and does not lead to a breach of peace or to public disorder. In fact, if you will recall, and you will read this in some of the commentaries to the penal code, that in Macaulay's penal code, they included this as a criminal offense, defamation, slander, etc., only because at that time it was apprehended that it might lead to a breach of public peace. But there is no such apprehension today. In criminal prosecution, it is important to note that it is not enough to say that the words spoken or written are true. It has to be further established by the accused under 499 of the Penal Code that it was for the public good that the truth is disclosed. That is exception 1 to 499. This is, in my view, an intolerable burden, an unjustified and unreasonable encroachment on the right to freedom of speech and expression. But in a civil suit for the tort of defamation, truth is a complete defense. The liberty of invoking the criminal law has become, in my view, an excessive restriction on the fundamental right to free speech and expression. Even in accordance with notions of criminal jurisdiction, as I said, prevailing at the time when the code was enacted, the background to 499 shows it was originally made a criminal offense only because of its possible tendency to promote a breach of peace. But all this is a thing of the past. But just see how progressive nations have resolved these things, whilst our members of parliament unfortunately keep squabbling about who took which bribe and when and so on and so forth, and they won't pass any law. In England, the criminalization of libel and slander is now abolished, and it was the Human Rights Act of 1998 that led to this. The law there now is that a statement is not defamatory unless its publication has caused or is likely to cause substantial harm to the reputation of the claimant. Mark the word substantial harm. This is now known as the substantial harm test. The pre-existing qualified privilege for journalists, known as the Reynolds defense, is now no longer operative. In America, they are so concerned with the large jury damages that are awarded in Britain that they have enacted what is known as the Speech Act of 2010. The Speech Act, each letter SPEECH stands for, and that's the name of the act, Securing the Protection of Our Enduring and Established Constitutional Heritage Act 2010. It was signed by President Obama in 2010, and it was enacted because English courts with their juries had become the forum of choice for actions for libel, and this was having a chilling effect on the freedom of expression in the United States. See how prompt they are to do something which another nation has done and they don't like it, so they enact a law, because there is a regard for what's happening in the country and what needs to be done in the matter of making of laws. The Speech Act was enacted in the US to prevent foreign libel judgments being enforced in America, and it was signed into law in 2010. Then again, they have now what is known as the UK Defamation Act of 2013, which has changed the previous existing criteria for successful claims in the following way. One, requiring claimants to show actual or probable serious harm. And for corporate bodies, that is bodies formed for profit, is now restricted to proof of serious financial loss. You have to prove serious financial loss if you want to sue the messenger, not just that my reputation is harmed. Two, by setting limits on geographical relevance before suing for defamation. Three, curtailing sharply the scope for claims of continuing defamation. Because if you, as you know, one paper copies another and says the same sort of thing, and the man gets another chance to sue another journalist or another newspaper. So this again has been done away with. Introducing new statutory defenses of truth, honest opinion, publication on a matter of public interest or privileged publications, including peer-reviewed scientific journals to replace the common law defenses of justification, fair comment, and what is known as the Reynolds defense, that is qualified knowledge for journalists. However, it has not quite codified defamation law into a single statute. And the 2013 Act in the UK has been cheered by a person called Jonathan Heawood in the Guardian newspaper. He says that it's very strong on freedom of speech, and it's described the old laws, which is our law, as sitting on the statute book like ugly toads, occasionally uttering a warning croak, echoed by even uglier and rather busier toads around the world. He goes on to speak of busier toads around the world, which includes our toads as well. Criminal libel laws, and this is the quote you must listen to, still apply in the majority of the world states to the detriment of free speech and the free flow of information. And let's be clear, these laws are not used to protect anyone's reputation. They are only used to silence dissent. The word sub judice, the term used to describe material which would prejudice court proceedings by publication, at one time a very difficult word, a word which got you into harm the moment you published something, and there was some court case which was pending for years. But fortunately, in India it has become irrelevant by sheer misuse and by the ways of television. Not very long ago, Subramaniam Swamy, the new member in the Rajya Sabha, raised a constitutional challenge for 499 and 500 of the Penal Code, just about a few months ago. Arguments were addressed, judgment was reserved, but somehow the judgment is still awaited. I have a shrewd suspicion that the bench of two judges who heard the case are not wholly agreed on what should be done. It is time you, journalists, you public-spirited individuals took up this issue, because, in my view, jailing the messenger is far more harmful than suing the messenger. Suits we can live with, they go on for a lifetime, and judgment comes very, very late in the day. And what is more fortunate for you all, in England, of course, they've remedied it, but we haven't here. There are no interim damages for tort. That means you can file a suit for defamation, but you can't get any interim relief, save and except an injunction not to repeat the defamation. But you can't get interim damages. They had to amend the law in England. In England, you can get interim damages if the court finds that it is a scandalous behavior of the journalist or the editor. So, but what's more important, I think, and this is where I believe that we must pursue. This suing the messenger, the stories it tells are very revealing, because the corporate world, after all, if you remember, the word limited was an invention of lawyers, company lawyers in England. Lord Bramwell is supposed to have been the originator of it. He was a judge later. And he was so fond of that word limited that he said it should be put on his tombstone. unfortunately his executors did not put it on that expression on his tombstone, because the word limited is really meant to frighten people away from corporates. To say that, look here, the shareholders may be 1, maybe 1,000, maybe 1 lakh or 100,000. But for God's sake, be careful, because the liability of a shareholder is limited to the shares he holds, and he doesn't have to pay a pie. It's the corporate entity that ultimately pays. And that's where, unfortunately, we have not invented anything better than this limited liability. And this has led to a great deal of fraud all over the world. Enron was a great instrument of success. My son went to the Harvard Law School, and one of the papers that he had was the success of Enron in those days, in 1990s. And then, when Enron failed, it became bankrupt, Chapter 11, bankruptcy, they didn't stop. They had another paper, the failure of Enron. Yes. And it's still being taught in the Harvard Law School. Why did it fail? What happened? I mean, how did the ethics run out? And this is a problem which I think all journalists can certainly look into, especially journalists who deal with these corporate frauds. And the recent revelations of the Panama Papers will definitely make you feel that the big corporates have something to hide. So I think you can go ahead, and as long as you don't get shot, shoot the messenger. Don't worry if you get sued. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nariman, for those very, very, I should say, encouraging, optimistic remarks. We have a full house. There's a little bit of space over here on the aisles along here. So if some of you can go right around there and find a place for yourself, that would be very good indeed.